Hi class, how you doing? So I wanted to talk a little bit about the two readings that you guys have had this week and the two readings that are going to end in a short analysis essay where you're going to either break down the ideas of one essay, or you're going to make a comparison and respond to some of the discussion and criticism that Bell Hooks has about Beyonce's Lemonade film. So I wanted to just pull out a couple of things and talk a little bit about them. These two essays are connected in a number of different ways, and they are connected primarily through Bell Hooks's ongoing discussion about concepts of love and breaking down racial barriers and issues of race by discussing and using love as a solution, and how issues of race are also directly connected to issues of gender and sex discrimination, and the idea or the concept of patriarchy. And so it's a lot of stuff that Hooks has kind of gotten into. So I'll start there. We're going to talk a little bit about those things specifically and how they have to do with one another, making sure you're kind of on the right track. You're looking at some of the connections that are pretty important in both of these essays. So let's take a look at them. This is something that we really haven't discussed as much lately this semester, especially this genre. So we've talked a little bit about nonfiction, how thematically nonfiction, even something like a graphic novel, can be broken apart through analysis, discussed, and interpretations can lead one to a better understanding of what they've read and what they're reading about. And this is a different type of nonfiction. So this is obviously literary criticism. This is film criticism and popular culture criticism on popular culture. Hooks is the author of both of these pieces. And we lost Bell Hooks this past year. And she is and was, for many people, a source of continuing discussion and deepening of a discussion of race and sexuality, gender, and defining what feminism is, especially her type of feminism, which is I think gives a definition that most people associate with her. And that comes from her book, Feminism is for Everybody. And I think her later work is all about that, because Feminism is for Everybody is a later book that she wrote after writing many books about kind of the issues that she's discussing in these essays. The piece that I wanted to start with is love as a practice for freedom. In this, she is discussing the problems that she sees specifically with regard to dealing with patriarchal structures, problems with definitions of feminism, and her criticism of popular culture. And underneath it all, or I would like to say, I guess when I talk about this essay, is that this essay is much more of, to give like a metaphor of like something that, like you might eat, right? Like a fruit. This is in the center of it all. And it's the foundation for pretty much everything that she's arguing. And that's why I add this essay along with the Moving Beyond Pain essay, which is a criticism of Beyonce's work, because this sets up that foundation, that argument. And ultimately, the argument is a discussion of how she defines feminism and the fight against not just feminism, fight against domination, race and race theory or race issues, discrimination. The foundation of that, she's arguing, is much more about living in a culture of domination, a culture of consumption. And she talks about how the patriarchy is associated with these issues of consumption, but also these issues that we see that she describes or explains as a culture where ideas or concepts of love and love itself is seen as weak, and that no one can prosper in a society where love is seen as weak. Violence is what sustains, or threat of violence is what sustains many. And so I'm going to start with this quotation here on the third page. A culture of domination is anti-love. It requires violence to sustain itself. To choose love is to go against the prevailing values of the culture. Many people feel unable to love either themselves or others because they do not know what love is. Contemporary songs like Tina Turner's What's Love Got to Do with It advocate a system of exchange around desire, mirroring the economics of capitalism. The idea that love is important is mocked. In his essay, Love and Need, Is Love a Package or a Message? Thomas Merton argues that we are taught within the framework of competitive consumer capitalism to see love as a business deal. This concept of love assumes that the machinery of buying and selling of needs is what makes everything run. It regards life as a market and love as a variation on free enterprise. Though many folks recognize and critique the commercialization of love, they see no alternative. Not knowing how to love or even what love is, many people feel emotionally lost. Others search for definitions for ways to sustain a love ethic in a culture that negates human value and valorizes materialism. Wow, that's a really big, huge chunk. And I think this is the heart of her argument. There's a couple of things that I want to point out that she says that I think are particularly important. Contemporary songs. So she brings up a very old song from the 1980s. So obviously this is a reference that's a little bit more dated. And she has, in Moving Beyond Pain, a much more current discussion or example of this issue. And she brings it up. And this issue is a concern with, or an obsession with, consumerism and identifying and defining love within that system, and how that breaks everything apart and makes things much more difficult to move, and is behind some of these concepts like domination by patriarchy. I think what she uses, Merton's quotation, right? The concept of love assumes that the machinery of buying and selling of needs is what makes everything run. This leads hooks to argue for this feeling of incompleteness, this feeling of loss, and that need or search for a love ethic. I think that's a really interesting, evocative thing to think of. And we may, now that this essay is probably dated, we may think of this as commonplace or something that is touted a lot more. It's not an incredibly popular idea, but it's a lot more, it's spoken about a lot more. And it's even become a little bit more commodified. We see advertisements about kindness and love filling the marketplace. And so we have to ask ourselves if what we are existing on right now and what we're learning about right now and what we're agreeing to right now is actually just another commodification of this idea or concept of love. And she says that's wrong. What we need to do is we need to continue to work for love and use this as a way to see ourselves, the society that we want to live in. By doing that, we will find ourselves, and we will also break down these issues of domination. She goes on to talk a little bit about this a little bit more in a few paragraphs later. Peck offers a working definition for love that is useful for those of us who would like to make a love ethic the core of all human interaction. He defines love as the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Commenting on prevailing cultural attitudes about love, Peck writes, "Everyone in our culture desires to some extent to be loving, yet many are in fact not loving. I therefore conclude that the desire to love is not itself love. Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both in intention and in action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love." And this is where Hooks really gets to the heart of her argument by using the next example. His words echo Martin Luther King's declaration, "I have decided to love," which also emphasizes choice. King believed that love is ultimately the only answer to the problems facing this nation and the entire planet. I share that belief in the conviction that it is in choosing love and beginning with love as the ethical foundation for politics that we are best positioned to transform society in ways that enhance the collective good. Wow. So she goes on to talk about how truly amazing King was to have the courage, right, that he had to talk about love when we live in a society that is ultimately views love as a weakness. All of this is, I think, a really good example of how she is looking at multiple time periods in our history and also putting them together to kind of begin to bridge together an explanation for how she sees the world. And she's giving it to us in a way that is an argument, which is part of the natural, I think, tendency for a nonfiction artist, right? A writer of nonfiction is through the argument. But she's definitely leaning toward and into a definition. And that, to me, seems more like a call to action. We should adopt this love ethic. These are the people who create possibilities within that definition, right? And so it is possible to make changes. So I'm going to move over to, oops. moving beyond pain. And I'd like to share that with you here. So moving beyond pain is a much shorter essay. And I only gave you just a little bit of a discussion of the previous essay, because I'd like for you to read it and create your own understanding of the definitions that she's setting forth, with just a little bit of a nudge toward what I want you to see in the essay. And that is her driving this definition and this discussion of the love ethic forward. And in Moving Beyond Pain, a much shorter essay, a very current essay, she's bringing up a number of different things. I wanted to point out one of the major similarities. What you're going to see in reading both of these essays is that you're going to see a lot of places where she is talking about very similar things, though the two essays span a different amount of time, a pretty long amount of time in her writing life, so over 20 years. But the connections there are still present. So she's talking about the film Lemonade, which is up for you guys to watch. And I'd like you to pay attention to the film, watch it, spend some time looking at the entire film, and focus on the parts that she more specifically points to. The piece in the beginning, the piece where she talks about rage, and one of the last pieces. And so she talks about all of this, but she makes a connection, and it's a connection I think is pretty important. And here it is. So I'm going to just start with the second paragraph. Viewers who like to suggest Lemonade was created solely or primarily for Black female audiences are missing the point. Commodities, irrespective of their subject matter, are made, produced, and marketed to entice any and all consumers. Beyonce's audience is the world, and that world of business and money-making has no color. What makes this production, this commodity, daring is its subject matter. Obviously, Lemonade positively exploits images of Black female bodies, placing them at the center, making them the norm. And then she goes on to describe that. The unnamed, unidentified mothers of murdered young Black males are each given pride of place. Real-life images of ordinary, overweight, not dressed up bodies are placed within a visual backdrop that includes stylized choreographed fashion plate fantasy representations. Despite all the glamorous showcasing of Deep South antebellum fashion, when the show begins, Beyonce's star appears in sporty casual clothing, the controversial hit hoodie. Concurrently, the scantily clothed dancing image of athlete Serena Williams also evokes sportswear. Speaking of commodification, in the real life frame, Beyonce's new line of sportswear, Ivy Park, is in the process of being marketed right now. Okay, here is a huge paragraph that is discussing, I think at the heart of it, something that she gets to in the other essay, and that is the idea or concept of commodification. And she is moving through the lens of looking at commodification. She's looking at how representation ultimately is associated with commodity. And she brings up something I think is really important, and that is Claudia Rankine, the very famous hoodie. Obviously the hoodie that designates the loss of murdered Black men. And Claudia Rankine's poem or book titled Citizen also uses an image of the hoodie, which is a piece of artwork. And it's a conversation. It's a conversation about what it's like to be hunted in society, to feel afraid of what many or most identify as justice and is not, but also this idea, this concept of the visual, that you can't escape the visual, right? The commodity, the thing. And so the hoodie is brought up here, and I wanted to make a little note that if you haven't read the book Citizen by Claudia Rankine, that you should. It's a really amazing book that discusses a lot of what's happening behind the surface or behind in the background of Moving Beyond Pain by Bell Hooks, because she brings up not only the hoodie, but she also brings up Serena Williams. And Claudia Rankine, the poet in Citizen, it spends a lot of time talking about Serena Williams and tennis and that sport and issues of Black feminism and Black bodies and race. Okay, so this is all happening kind of behind the surface. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can also check out just the poem itself, Citizen. And I can add a link to that poem for you when you see this video. Underneath it all, she's talking about the Lemonade, and she says Lemonade offers viewers a visual extravaganza, a display of Black female bodies that transgress all boundaries. It's all about the body and the body as commodity. This is certainly not radical or revolutionary. From slavery to the present day, Black female bodies, clothed and unclothed, have been bought and sold. What makes this commodification different in Lemonade is intent. Its purpose is to seduce, celebrate, and delight, to challenge the ongoing present day devaluation and dehumanization of the Black female body. Okay, so here is more discussion of commodifying, even to the point of commodifying human bodies, and to resist looking away from a history where we in this country have done this. So there is a conversation happening about that. What she gets to here, though, ultimately is an argument about the problems inherent in Lemonade. And this is where I want you to respond. Watch Lemonade, respond to what she says is a valorization, a celebration of violence. And she doesn't, and Bell Hooks doesn't know if by the end of this film, one is able to transgress and come around and find resolution from trauma if violence was a part of that. And so she has some pretty, I think, interesting arguments for that. It says later on, it says, concurrently in the world of art making, a Black female creator as powerfully placed as Beyonce can both create images and present viewers with her own interpretation of what those images mean. However, her interpretation cannot stand as truth. For example, Beyonce uses her non-fictional voice and persona to claim feminism, even to claim, as she does in a recent issue of Elle magazine, to give clarity to true meaning of the term. But her construction of feminism cannot be trusted. Her vision of feminism does not call for an end to patriarchal domination. It's all about insisting on equal rights for men and women. In the world of fantasy feminism, there are no class, sex, and race hierarchies that break down simplified categories of women and men. No call to challenge and change systems of domination. No emphasis on intersectionality, which is the bridging, right? The understanding and the bridging of many different interrelated issues surrounding ethics, race, gender, rights, all of those kinds of things, coming together of many different ideas on that. In such a simplified worldview, women gaining the freedom to be like men can be seen as powerful, but it is a false construction of power, as so many men, especially Black men, do not possess actual power. And indeed, it is clear that Black male cruelty and violence towards Black women is a direct outcome of patriarchal exploitation and oppression. This is where I'd like you to go back to practice love as a practice, right? And the love ethic, and what Hooks says earlier in that essay about patriarchy and using ideas that are just consistent with patriarchy to solve problems with patriarchy. And Hooks is saying, no, you can't do that. You have to create a new world. You need to create a new love ethic, one that doesn't stand with just patriarchy. Now we're understanding patriarchy as a system of domination and power and control by the masculine toward the feminine. Men and women are a part of that. But when you deal with issues of patriarchy, it can be really difficult to define it, because a lot of our connotations roll back to that idea that, it's men are the problem or something like that, right? Which is that conversation that we get a lot of times, or the fear of that conversation. But patriarchy is a system of control, and it's dominated by men, but it is not. Hooks would argue that it is not men who do it. It is a system, an overarching system that men and women are a part of. And so that's an interesting idea, how she kind of describes patriarchy. And I think it allows for a conversation where we don't have to get into the hypothetical man versus woman kind of argument. And I think that that stands in the way of a lot of discussions that we can have about the problems that we see with the system that we're currently in or within, which is patriarchy. So her argument is really about not just patriarchy, but this idea of consumption, consumerism, and exploitation of love, and how people don't really know how to love. Anyway, so this was supposed to be like a short discussion of these two things, but you can't really get into a short discussion of this. So what I wanted you to do, though, is listen to a little bit of what I was talking about in terms of making the connections between the two essays. And the essay Moving Beyond Pain is an essay that is speaking directly about a popular culture film and icon, and a human, right? Beyonce, and criticizing it, talking about the problems that, Bell Hooks sees within it. So I want you to make your own arguments about it. I want you to respond to what you think is inherently good or bad, exploitative or interesting or inspiring with regard to the film. And so many people do. That's why this criticism was really an interesting one, because it's good to provide, right, a nuanced criticism of something that everybody or many people think is just this specific type of thing, like, oh, this is all positive. No, it's good to have some criticism and discussion. And that's the best thing that I think that literary criticism and popular culture criticism does, is it gives us a lens, gives us an allowance to be critical of things that are happening that we may feel a little bit, conflicted about. Okay, so I wanted you to come up with your own ideas about it. So take a look, watch the video, read the 2 essays, yeah, that's it. All right, if you have questions or you want to talk about this with me, I'm in my office hours. Come and see me. I'll be on Zoom tomorrow, on Wednesdays, and then on Thursday I'll be in my office, but you can always drop me a line, send me an email, and we can meet up. All right, I hope you have a really good night. Bye-bye.